thank you guys for being here. Do you want to start off talking a little bit about the film for those people who didn't get a chance to check it out in advance? Like what the film is and why you made it.
Absolutely. So the film, No Time to Fail, is really focuses on the election officials who are at the heart of how elections work in the state of Rhode Island. That's why is it in Rhode Island? Rhode Island is where I am from. It's where I am born. It's where I currently live. Margo was a longtime Rhode Island resident. She lives adjacent to Rhode Island. So it was during the pandemic. This was all about access, about telling a really deep story behind the scenes of an invisible workforce who is up until recently a quite invisible workforce who were hard at work trying to pull off a very significant election during a global pandemic. And so because we had this unique access into this space, we dove in deep in Rhode Island. But one thing to keep in mind is that elections, while they are unique and quirky in all the different places that they happen throughout the country, there are a lot of similarities that are really important. And so you could focus on an election story in any one specific place, like a tiny little place like Rhode Island, but actually learn a lot about how elections are run all throughout the US.
I would love,
It's a very character-driven story. So I wanted Margo, if you could say a little bit more about what I'm missing.
or what you're probably about to say anyway. No, I wanted to just quickly ask if you have seen the film, can you just drop in the chat that you've seen it? I'd love to get a sense for how many people we're talking to have seen the film. No pressure, just curious. And then for those who haven't seen it, I would add that this is very much a pandemic film. So it was when we couldn't take cruising. So it's a film that's very handmade, much like elections. And what we mean by that is Sarah and I shot most of it ourselves, and we're not cinematographers. It did bring an intimacy. So it brings an intimacy to the footage. It's a verite film. Just to give you a framework for what we're talking about. It's a 90-minute film.
I thought it was really nicely shot. Like I don't didn't disparage you guys are now no, you guys are now cinematographers. You know, it's like no, it's like you did it. Like, I've shot a number of my own films, and even though maybe it could have been better with the DP, probably, but at least
Uh,
I shot it and, take the credit, It's like, um,
Hashtag never again, John. I love
really?
I love working with DPs. I really like being in the moment with a character, but this was definitely one of those situations in production where and to be fair, a lot of people went into spaces during COVID and shot in spaces with full crews. It was a decision that Margo and I made, not just for ourselves and for the crews, but these election workers, they did not have the opportunity of getting sick. So
Right.
there were very stringent requirements that our access was actually predicated on the fact of like really being strict about safety protocols. So we would have a sound person come in and help us with mic placement, help us with our gear. We would have a DP who kind of advised us, but nobody who was in the rooms with us. So we were that like we were those one woman bands in every space that we shot. It was actually kind of hilarious looking at us. But that's how your movies get made, right? That's how
And
that's how some movies get made.
yeah, and I also think that it probably affected the quality of the footage that you got. Like, I think having just people, it's not like a crew and people I find that, it potentially provides more intimacy and you get more material that way,
The
personally.
folks in the film definitely relaxed more because it was just Sarah and I, and we would spend hours and hours. It's that kind of verite style filming, and got, I think, a little bit more transparency because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to a shout out to what we learned about elections in the process. I know we need to talk about distribution, but the reason, if a teacher got sick with COVID, there would be a substitute teacher. There's no one trained to take over the administration of elections. So if an election office got sick, people's constitutional right to vote was in jeopardy because there would be nobody to come in to take over while they were out with COVID. So that's why that was it was really a big deal to try to keep everyone healthy.
And I think
Interesting.
just because sometimes people assume that poll workers are the election officials that we're talking about, poll workers you can replace. Poll workers are just regular everyday citizens like any of us on this Zoom. But the election officials are an actual trained profession that take care of your your voter registration information. These are often the people who are like doing your birth certificates and things like that. Um, um, but this is an actual how do I say this? These are civil service workers who are part of your everyday fabric, not just the people who happen to be there on election day. So the significance of their role in terms of people's right to vote was much more important.
Cool. And then what, how would you say, I mean, this is pretty obvious in a sense, but I'm kind of curious, like in terms of the branding of the film, like the unique, like how are you positioning this film different from other films that dealt with like electoral process, et cetera? Although I don't think there's any other film that does what you guys did.
That's
Yeah.
actually how we positioned it from the very beginning, which is that there to this day aren't any other films that we know of that really follow election officials.
Hmm.
Filmmakers tend to follow campaigns for reasons that are, obvious, and those are great films. But there really aren't any other films that follow the process behind the scenes. And when we started this, if you watch the film, you'll see how the attacks on election officials creep in. So we were sort of seeing that happen in real time while we were filming. But when we started, we didn't know that was going to happen. And since then, news media has done a lot of interviewing of election officials and talking about threats to them, but we still don't know of any other film that actually follows them in the way that we make narrative work.
Right. Cool. So what was your goal? Well, I guess in a sense, what was your goal with the film? But I always want to find out what was your goal with the distribution of the film, and curious if those align, how those aligned.
Do you want to start? Yeah, why don't you start?
Okay, so yeah, so this is, we're a good classic case study because we learned some classic lessons. And so, what do I mean by that? Our original goal for the film was to educate voters and to bring them in the lives of this labor force that's unseen and whose work is invisible. And so, our stated audience was the American electorate, and we really wanted to go wide and far, and we wanted, some kind of big national exposure, whatever that looked like. Um, and and at the same time, we were really focused on, by the time we were in edit, the attacks on the election officials were vicious. I mean, there were election officials in hiding, threats of violence. I mean, it was really bad, and not just in one part of the country, but all across the country. And so we really wanted the film to be part of the national conversation before the midterms. And so impact goals started to be prioritized, completely prioritized over the industry calendar. And our audience, target audience, was still the American electorate. As soon as we started showing the film to election officials outside of the folks in the film, it started to shift very quickly because the film resonated across the country with election officials everywhere. And what really surprised me is that we filmed in Rhode Island, where thank goodness there were no direct threats. They got some nasty emails and some messages, but nobody was in hiding, nobody's family was in danger. But in places where that was true, election officials were calling us or emailing us or chatting with us online about saying like, are you sure this isn't Florida or Nevada or Georgia? This, like, I'm watching this all unfold in your film and it looks like my office. Like, what's happening there is what's happening in my office. And so that is when we started to understand it. Oh, and we were getting so many, they were sharing it amongst themselves. So it was really traveling very quickly amongst election officials nationally. And that is when we started to understand that the film was doing the work of building community amongst election officials. Like, I see you, you see me, we're all in this together. And that they were going to end up being our champions for getting the film out beyond.
And I just want to add a little something to that, which is that there was a major cultural dissonance at that time for them that this film helped to address. And I think it's something that we don't talk about a lot. It's something that kind of like our political culture has kind of just like plowed through and stopped dealing with. But the 2020 election was incredibly challenging for election officials. It was the most successful and safe election in our nation's history to that time, and they did it during a global pandemic. It was a remarkable success. And yet the entire public narrative around the election was one of the potential, like people asking questions, what is all of this about election fraud, etc. And so no one pat these people on the back. No one clanged their pots and pans about their wonderful work. There was no parade of gratitude for these folks. And so there was this major, as I said, a major dissonance between what they experienced and what they actually pulled off and how our culture talked about it. And so for them, this film, many of them said this film is giving me PTSD, but others and people would cry watching this film who had experiences in election work, but they also felt respected. They felt, as Margot mentioned, they felt seen, and it helped for them to correct a narrative that they felt was falsely circulating.
Right. So, so your initial audience was the entire American electorate, pretty broad, but then ultimately you felt that, I mean, I think there's still a little bit of that, but ultimately you felt like your core audience was these election workers, and I guess in a sense that the niche that you're looking at would be people concerned about elections, like interested in how the electoral process works in the United States. And I would say, is it safe to say that one of the cores are the election workers themselves? But then, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but then but I wanted the other kind of core audiences would be organizations, it feels like, that are concerned about this process. And so, one of the avenues that we always talk about in terms of engaging, once you know who your audience is or have a sense of who your audience is, how do you engage them? And I think the primary purpose for you, or what would you say the primary avenue for engaging your audience was?
I would also broaden. We'll answer that question. We brought this film out into the world in a moment when not only are election officials under attack, but government institution is under attack. So the
Mhm.
relationship with the American public and government institutions is being questioned across the board, and government officials, I would say, have been as much champions of the other government officials of this film as election officials. So in a lot of different government buildings. They showed it at the Pentagon. I forget who our contact was at the Pentagon, and then emailed glowing about how they had shown it as part of their service to military voters, and had just had so much positive to say about it. It was really eye-opening, I think, for Sara and I to see how people were using it in ways that we weren't expecting.
Right.
Yeah, like the Maryland legislature at one point was going to be watching it. The Justice Department Elections Division watched it. These are ways that your film travels that you don't necessarily imagine at first. But I think, to the point of this particular conversation, I would say that we've never taken our eyes off that prize of like wanting a generalized audience and wanting this to be not just an emotional but educational experience for the American electorate to really understand how elections work, because nobody really does, and that's part of the friggin' problem. Um,
Right.
but when we were able to actually focus in on the niche audience as a point from which to grow to the bigger audience, we were able to create more traction. We were able to become more focused in our execution, and we were able to actually do what many films need to do, which is the slow build to the bigger audience. So it was not that we ever lost sight of that bigger piece. It's that starting there was not the smart place to start for this film.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I would say it generally is not the smart place to start for any film.
Any film, right,
Yeah, no,
right.
I was going to say that. I think that I was smiling so much at how we defined audience because that's not how I would inform someone coming up and looking for advice, that it's really important to know who your niche audience is. That doesn't mean you don't want to broaden out, but that it's really important to understand that when you're launching a project.
Yeah.
And to the point about organizational partners, another place where we really where that can really lift up a film, where this film and other films I've worked on have found a groove, is with national partners that are mission aligned and who have chapters. So all mission aligned groups are good partners. In particular, groups who have lots of chapters all over the country are a fantastic way to start broadening. And so for us, it was the League of Women Voters. We had one of the staff in their national audience. If you're here, I don't even know if they're on. They sometimes join these things. One of their staff in their national audience was a huge champion of the film from when we were in the field, like with our little COVID gear and like reporting back. So we were a lot from the very beginning. We worked closely, and Sara and I put a lot of time into that relationship. I give them credit for also putting time into it, but I want to say that as for the filmmakers on the call, the number of Zoom meetings you do with these kinds of partners do pay off. It feels like a big investment of time, and it is, but you need to be there for each other. You can't expect them to just grab your film and run with it. You have to also be there for them. And over years, we built relationships with a few national organizations. The League of Women Voters stands out as the strongest one for distribution because of their chapters. But we also had great partnerships with the Brennan Center, and they came in and helped in other ways, right? With Common Cause, which also has chapters around the country. An Issue One, there's a number of organizations, some of which don't have as many chapters, but can help in other very important ways. So investing time in those partnerships will pay dividends if you think your film will do any kind of outreach or impact work.
Yeah, I would agree. I always say, like, national partners, local partners, but really go after those national partners with local chapters, and
It's
it's like,
incredible. I mean, we did a semi-theatrical, or we did like I'm sorry, a limited theatrical about 10 cities, basically in a way to raise visibility, get press, get into really like core communities where we felt the film could create some traction. But the League of Women Voters took this film to over 30 states.
mhm.
And they were really soldiers on the ground, who, they're looking for ways to actually engage the people we were actually trying to reach, right? Regular voters. They were the ones, they were the conduit. So for us to really focus on civic organizations in addition to election officials. So as Margo, I think, positioned it, election officials and people who care about election officials. Um, that was our way to actually expand beyond what anything like festivals or even the work of a limited theatrical could do.
So because this is such an important part of your release and it's important for so many filmmakers, can you kind of really walk us through granularly that process of connecting with these partners? Like, when in the process did you do it? How did you go about reaching them? Like, how did you get their contact information? What were your first emails like? How did you then create that kind of win-win partner? Like, just even, I think it's really instructive, like, as much as you remember the details of this, like, what were those steps? Like, even from doing the research to figure out who from the very beginning, in a sense.
Yeah.
I think the strength of our partnerships comes from the fact that we started building them as part of our research. So when we were developing the project, now the development was like this long because we had to start shooting right away. But even as we were, so that's, it was June. This was Sara's idea. Sara, shout out to Sara. She called me in June. Everything was already happening in real time that we should be capturing. So we were scrambling to figure out who we might follow, building some trust with them and getting in the field. And at the same time, we would be in the field and then we would like jump on a call with the Brennan Center from the field. And we were just asking questions. What do we need to know about elections that we don't know? What do we need to understand about the difference between Rhode Island and other states? What needs to be in this film for it to validly reflect the work? Right? And those calls weren't asking for anything else. It was just educate us, help us understand your work. Let us know what you're doing. We'd love to jump in on your webinars. They were really honest. We weren't even thinking distro now, like I will always think that when I'm doing this, but they were really honest research calls. And then over a long period of time, we were staying in touch. And often it was us asking for advice. Sometimes it was us providing them with stuff we'd captured in the field that was helpful to them, right? We could provide on a limited basis footage for like an educational event they're having, and they can use, they would just show a little video of somebody working elections, and that's helpful to them. And it became a partnership where, for some of the press, we had folks join us for those conversations. So it's helpful to the film to have an expert. We would invite them on, but I think it's helpful for their organization to get more exposure through our press contacts, right? So maybe I'm being still too big picture for what you wanted, John, but everything you do, see it as a partnership, as helping each other, and asking for a lot of advice can be a good way to send those emails. Can you teach
And I
me?
do, I think like one of the things that we had there, of course, some of this is about relationships you already have and like deepening them. And sometimes the relationships you have can then lead to an introduction, and that's always helpful. Some of these were absolutely cold asks, but we had something special for these organizations that they were hungry for, right? So, as much as there was factual information about election officials and how elections work, there was no emotional storytelling that these people had to point to or had as a resource. And they were like, finally, someone is actually covering this story. And so, of course, having some sample footage to show them was actually instrumental to winning them over. So, they they bought in on the mission of the film from the beginning, and they were lured in more deeply by our footage and our storytelling ability. That said, I think the other thing that was really interesting with this film is that one of the reasons that the people in the film agreed to be a part of the film, much to their own discomfort, none of them are spotlight people, none of them are camera hungry. Um, they really wanted people to understand what they do. That was their primary goal. And because election official world is kind of like documentary world, where it's really tiny and a lot of people know each other, even some of the people in the film were helpful and instrumental in making some of the relationships work with some of the other organizations. Like, for example, Rob Rock, who's one of the characters in No Time to Fail, he connected us with the National Association of State Election Directors, who ended up being really pivotal for us to get the film out nationally again. So like all 50 states could be seeing this film in terms of their election administrators. But also, they helped us fact check this movie. So again, they had
Mhm.
no editorial control of this film whatsoever. They did not ask for things to be removed or changed. All they did was look at it to make sure everything was factually accurate. And having them both as partners for distribution, but also a resource on those stages of the film was incredibly important.
So I see some activity in the chat.
Oh,
Margo answering. So I'm kind of curious. I think something has to do with cold emails and outreach and kind of like just because a lot of filmmakers went, well, how do you get people's contact information and how do you reach out to them? And so just kind of really getting granular, like, how did you
ah,
do that? And then and then what was the like how long what tips on cold emails do you have in terms of like I find that a lot of filmmakers write too much information. Like how do you
100%.
how do you write like what length? To me it's like two short paragraphs, like in like maybe 3 or 4 sentences, and that's it. You just and what's in having a drink. So but before I go on, like how did you guys do it?
yeah, I think to this question, it's important to point out that we were writing track records in other spaces. So
Mhm.
Sarah's roots in Rhode Island are deep. She's from Cranston, which, so I'm speaking for you, Sarah, but like that's where some of our characters are from and live. And then if you heard her say, one of our biggest national allies was through one of the people in the film who referred us, right? So you're leaning in, all of you filmmakers on this call have your own connections. You're leaning on those. So you're cold emailing, but you're cold emailing with a track record. I had already made a film in Rhode Island called Councilwoman, and that's like one of the sentences in the film. If you want to see my other work here, and so there was already some media that people could watch to see what the quality of the filmmaking would be.
Mhm.
So, leaning to where you have track record, so it's cold, but it's not cold, right? And yeah, short and sweet. The email is just to start a conversation. That's all it is. You need to think about what are the sentences you will write that will have them hit reply, right? So what are the facts they need to know? The minimal amount of facts so that they want more. It's almost like editing. Like in editing, you want to make sure people want to know more. Like you want to keep watching and they're going to want to know more. So you have to make sure every beat keeps people wanting to keep watching to the next beat. The email is the same, right? Enough information so that they want to know more. Offer of like always, making it clear you're not asking, and nothing that makes it look like you're asking for them to do work, right? People don't want to respond to emails where it's like, oh my god, this is more work for me. It needs to be quick and easy, like I just have a quick question, or I'd like to just run this by you, or just can we talk for a minute, or do you have 15, like something where it's not asking. They may end up doing a ton of work, you might work with them a lot, but the initial email needs to feel really easy to respond to.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think all of that is right. And I think, uh, you know, what you were saying earlier, John, is that like the brevity is beauty, 100% all the time. But you want to like actually just give them enough of a nugget. Like Margo was mentioning, like those emails just within the Rhode Island context and getting access and getting into those spaces. But when it came to like the national organizations, the ones that we did not have context with, it was really about a short, like brevity, absolutely important. Being able to reference our credentials, absolutely very important. Um, and the other piece was like, we have something that we think might, like, that's for you. We're not asking you for us. We have something that we think we can be offering you, and we'd love to talk to you about it. So the ask was more like, how can we help? How can we help you?
Yeah,
And
I think
just a little bit
that's
of the,
great. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I think that's great. Like I always say, like make sure it's a win-win partnership, but actually that they win more than you in a sense. Like you at least have to start off that way. And I think that's a great way of putting it, that like what can we do for you, is really wonderful. Did you because I've worked with another film that did the same thing where they started doing outreach in development and they actually raised money from these organizations. Were you able, and not all organizations, and I wouldn't go into this thinking that organizations have money to fund you, but did you find that that was a source of funding for your project or not so much?
Not in the short term. And what the
Yeah.
reason I say that is that if we want to jump into it now, we made a sister film to this film called The Officials. It's a 26-minute film that's streaming on time.com. It very much came out of the impact work on this film. And it one of the funders of that film came through the 4 years of building relationships with some of these national organizations. So if you really invest in the relationships, they do, and it was actually without even asking for money. It was more like, please take this money to be successful. But that doesn't happen overnight. It happens from years of investing in the relationship. And we never went into these partnerships expecting to ask money of them. We asked of them other things like putting out money to. They were putting out their own money to their own groups to hold events to host the film. We never funded these events. We asked them to do publicity, right? We actually have partnership on publicity for the new film also from one of these national orgs. But it was never like, please give us X thousand dollars for the film.
Right.
It's more we're
Right.
building partnership together, and if they're spending resources, they're doing it as part of the partnership.
Right. Did you guys ever create a deck, to show people, or did you have a sponsor or partnership deck that you showed people?
We absolutely did. And I think, people have all different kinds of feelings about decks. And I think that like as somebody who is not, I don't use a lot of these softwares. I'm like an old analog person. Um, but they are quite easy. We did hire a designer to do it because we really wanted something that looked professional, and that was basically a storytelling tool for us.
Hmm.
It ended up being a really good investment. It helped bring a level of polish to the presentation and to just show that we were serious about what we were talking about. That
Right.
deck, you know, the deck talked about the film as the story, but really did outline what we hoped to accomplish with the distribution for the film quite effectively. And of course, because I don't know that we've talked about this before, but we did do a think tank prior to creating that deck. So we
Right.
organized a think tank of all of these partner organizations that we've been building throughout the production period. When we felt like probably about midway through the edit, we did a meeting of all of them. So we had scenes to show them. We didn't really have, we had a very rough film to show them, not at all close to where it actually landed. But to say, okay, take a look at all of this, what's working, what's not, and how do we activate this within the communities that you have, that are your constituents? How do we make that work? And we took all of the ideas, we figured out what would work for us, what would work for them, how these things could network together, and created the deck from that planning session.
I would
Oh,
say though, before investing a lot of time and money in a deck, the networking and the relationship building has to come first. Because if you,
Yeah.
otherwise the deck isn't, first of all, it's not going to speak to the audience, and a deck never does all the work. A deck is like, it shows that you're professional, it's something to email around, but the networking and the relationship building is top priority, and then the deck.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hang on a second. Um, So along those, so yeah, I did want to ask about it. I didn't know you guys did a brain trust, so I'd normally ask about that. So was that difficult? Because I do like films that are kind of developing their audience early, usually do a brain trust, at some point. And did you guys just kind of do that naturally yourselves? And is that something you just kind of like, use Doodle and Zoom in a sense to say when everyone was available, and then you did a Zoom and did it simply like that? Because you can do, there's people do very expensive brain trusts in a sense, but a lot of that expense is like finding the partners to be part of the brain trust, and you guys already had those. Can you just talk a little bit, I mean, very briefly about the process of doing the brain trust?
Yeah, I think so. We actually did partner with Looky Looky Pictures. If any of you on the call have heard of them or worked with them, and they have a lot of great resources for folks who are just starting out. We partnered with them, and they didn't have to do a lot of work because we already had all of. We gave them the database of here's who you need to reach out to. The reason we partnered with them is that one, we did have a grantor come in to say, let's start. You should start developing impact now, and here's some money to do that. Because we could have done it ourselves, but also Sara and I had way too many hats on. So it was right for that grantor to say, hire for something, you guys. Stop doing it all. I mean, we really had, because like I said, we were the sound recorders and the cinematographers. We were prepping the drives for the edit. We weren't the editors, but we were, we were scrubbing through all the dailies. Like we were doing way too much. So it made sense. But I would say it is it is possible to do it yourself. So don't get overwhelmed. And I would still hire someone to moderate for you. So you can do yourself the part of inviting, setting the time, the day, getting the Zoom link ready, finding a time that most people can do, and all the invites. But then for the day of, you need to be hyper focused as the filmmaker on what's happening, and you need someone to be on your Zoom with you to manage the call. That is the one hire that, like, it's really important.
Right, right. Okay. So moving on, is there anything about partnerships that we haven't discussed in terms of like engaging? I mean, we'll get into the distribution relationship of the partnerships. Well, actually, while we're on partnerships, how did you transition those partnerships into the distribution of the film? And, I guess at that point it's, I presume you already mentioned the theatrical release, but also community screenings. So how did you, just talk about that kind of pivoting?
Sara, I'm looking up the Red Owl website. Can you answer?
Sure. So I would say that the way in which those organizations, I mean, some of them were quite pivotal in each of the distribution stages. So for example, we worked really closely with Issue One. Issue One is a national nonpartisan organization specifically focused on election officials and kind of their work and narratives around them. They were absolutely in love with this film, in love with the entire mission of what we were trying to accomplish. they helped create a kind of live event to help correspond with, I think it was our broadcast, right, Margo, that they did with us, that featured Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who's probably one of the better known names of within the election sphere. Um, uh, I'm trying to remember names right now. I'm having some name recall problems. But we also had the election administrator from Philadelphia who had to briefly go into hiding, Republican during 2020, who's actually an incredible civil servant. And so we did this like live event with issue one that was a wonderful way to kind of boost interest in what we were doing with the broadcast. Um, we mentioned the League of Women Voters. They had been completely instrumental. Brennan Center had been a really close partner throughout and really important folks for us in the fact checking and also in the research stage. They've produced all of these really incredible reports that were relevant to, but they were able to distribute. They were partially distributing our film throughout their networks, right? So they hosted a bunch of their own events. Each of these organizations hosted their own events within their networks and connected them to other conferences as well. But with Brennan Center, their folks also showed up to like our theatrical events. They were part of educating audiences wherever we went. So there was a lot of ways in which there were, yeah, these kind of woven relationships between how these films kind of helped us in our distribution plans, but then they also enhanced and amplified distribution in a lot of ways throughout their own networks.
I mean, I would quickly say, John, also you specifically asked, how did we transition? Excellent communication. We were
Oh,
constantly
that's
emailing them
absolutely
about
true.
the stage of the process we were in. So we're wrapping edit this month. You know, we need, and we would have to educate them. What is post? We tell, the color and the sound. We're expecting it to premiere this, so they can, then when we found out we were going to take it to the Rhode Island Film Festival, a couple of folks flew in for it. They were so excited about it, right? But the answer is excellent communication about where you're at in the process and then what you need. Because then they would email us like, how can we help? Right? Oh,
Right.
this is how you could help. But just
Yeah.
spending the time, keeping them in the loop. For filmmaking takes a long time, and folks who don't do it don't understand. Like, oh, you called me a year ago about this film. Why isn't it done? Right? Keeping them in the loop quells that.
Okay. So there's I guess, well, it's already 10:50, but I think that was, and I think you've been answering a lot of the questions in the chat already. So I think we can go a little bit longer doing this. How important was, it seems like partnerships was the main, way that you engaged audience, but are there, and we'll talk about earned media and press when we get to distribution, but was there, I guess the only other way that I know of from what we talked about, it was organic social, and how important, when did you start doing organic social and how important was that? And, so you can just talk about your, what you did with organic social.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the campaigns that inspired us in terms of social media and how to engage on that front was Through the Night. I don't know if you're
Mm.
familiar with the Through the Night film. We really loved that film, but we also like were really watching about what they were doing with social media and how it was aligning with basically their outreach mission. And so we hired the people who did that. We interviewed a lot of folks, but I would say that was a seeing that work in action was really attractive to us. I would say that like as much as we had good planning on social and really great execution on kind of like message and strategy, it just like didn't pick like here's what I think I wish we had done better, or and this is like me, I wish Sara had done better. Election officials are all on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. I hate Twitter. I think it's a cesspool. But you have to be in the spaces where your niche audience is in order to succeed in any single and on any front. And so I think we put a lot of our bucket on Instagram, and we should have bet all of our chips on Twitter. Um,
Mm.
uh, And that's where political talk is. That's where journalists are. That's where election officials are. It's not that we weren't there, but I would say that, and Margo, like, just please push me if I'm wrong on this. But I know, me as a filmmaker, I'm like, I fell down on that, and I should have been more active in the space where, honestly, the real legs for the film could have spread.
In terms of
Yeah.
our social, we did hire
Right.
for social media, and she was as active on Twitter as on the other platforms. I still think Sarah has a good point here, though, which is that we could have run our entire social campaign only there because that's now it's different, right? I don't think that's still true because it's
It was
so
true then.
it was
Yeah.
true then. But if you go where your audience is, we still hadn't yet identified the audience beyond the American electorate, and we didn't. This is more in hindsight. But our social media manager could have been tagging specifically the election officials constantly, and it would have taken off on Twitter because that's where they were all talking about the attacks on them. So we were on
Right.
Twitter, but we weren't tagging them as consistently. And so we could have
Right.
had the entire campaign much more focused as opposed to big picture, here's what the film's doing. It could have been, just like we're talking about how niche audience is so important, niche focus on social could have lifted it up more.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it didn't take off on social. It was on social. Our social media person did a fantastic job. I'll drop her link in there too, but it just didn't. We didn't have that focus for it to take off.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That
And
makes
I think
sense.
it could have been a much more active part of our planning. This is one of those things where you have like limited budget, limited staff, and lots of lessons in hindsight. So
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be lessons in hindsight, like,
yeah.
and so it's like it's for nearly every campaign. There's, lessons in hindsight. Geez, there's a lot of lessons in hindsight in the big campaign that just happened, you know. So, but I'm not going
Yes,
to go.
indeed, indeed.
Yes. So I want to move to distribution, although we've already started talking about it. So when did you develop a distribution strategy, and what was your initial distribution strategy?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think that like every filmmaker, and I've really disavowed myself of all of this at this point, but I think every filmmaker is like, like the traditional prestige journey is the journey that I want. And I think as much as a lot of folks say that they don't really care about those things, they care about audience. I think every filmmaker wants the validation of a prestige journey. And I think we found out really quickly, like right out of the bat, like our calendar for completion wasn't going to align with that. The way that we needed to get it very quickly out. I think we finished the film in August, and we really needed to have it out by the election. So, and then we just did that again, like a couple of dummies. But uh, so we had to work really fast and kind of just get rid of the prestige calendar from our heads. And so we're like, okay, right off the bat, first of all, we know that these festivals at the time they weren't super interested in a story that felt to them too local. Like Rhode Island, they instead of feeling like it's a focus story that could speak to a wide audience all over the country, they were like, it's too Rhode Island. I think they're wrong, and we're going to differ on that. A lot of audiences also that we've experienced also think they were wrong. Um, that said, we it wasn't like we learned and then pivot. We had to pivot in the moment. So we realized that our original plans of a traditional release were just not going to be in the cards if we really wanted to have the effect that this film was going to have. And we also knew that we would have to come at it in a very like impact focused way. So this wasn't a way that we were like, this is our way to get awards. This is a way to do this and this and this. This is about more about the social justice mission of documentary filmmaking. Um, we had like something in our sights that we wanted to change people's hearts and minds around election administration, and we had to dive deep into that. So we did a couple of festivals. We didn't do a ton of festivals, and then started doing we did our limited theatrical, and then just kind of like branched broad, like we went from there immediately, and we did it really fast.
Mhm.
Margo, what would you say? Like, because we went a handful of festivals, then we went right into the limited theatrical, and then like the League of Women Voters kind of took it on
Well,
in
you're
the.
forgetting that we hired Red Owl. So
Oh,
we
duh.
raised
Yeah.
money for a very robust impact rollout. And so we went to festivals. We started the impact rollout immediately and quickly. It included hiring Red Owl and hiring Wealth Agency, whose link I didn't have time to find, but she did the
Yeah.
social media. Started weekly team meetings, and we had a ton going on between the limited theatrical and eventizing all of those. We did these online events Sara mentioned with some high profile people nationally. And in the meantime, all of our partners were starting to, you have to remember that a lot of our partners, I forgot about this part, those 2 months before elections, election officials are actually quite busy. They don't have time for films. So our strategy was we go wide until the election, and then we go in, we work with election officials post election. And that's exactly what happened because of their time. So then, Red Owl basically ran a year-long campaign, and it included the League of Women Voters. It included lots of local screenings amongst election officials. It included a number of online events, and we used Kinema as a platform. We did some screenings with Kinema in October leading up to the election. Election officials who didn't have time were still coming onto those because they were so eager to see the film. That was another surprise. We thought election officials would engage after the election, but they had heard about it and they were so eager to see it that they blew up in a good way, right? We said there were 500 tickets to this online event and it was sold out. And then post election, Red Owl did, I would say, a traditional, what you all on this call, if you've heard of impact campaigns, a traditional campaign. So that is, people can reach out and say, we want to host the film, and then you reach back out and you schedule the time and you provide support. So it was that kind of a campaign after, and that led to a partnership with the Carter Center. And I want to lift it up because this was not a partner. We told you about how we spent all this time building partnerships. We did that. And this was a new partner who came on. And they came on for Mental Health Awareness Day, both because our impact team reached out to them and also because they had seen the need for mental health support for election officials. And they held this fantastic event that was providing mental health support for election officials alongside watching the film, which was a little ironic because if you'd worked in elections, it was really PTSD to watch the film and relive that time. So it was more about like, get your Kleenexes, we're going to cry together. And that was a partnership that came out of some of the Carter Center's own goals in their democracy program. So again, mission aligned,
yeah.
but it was a partner that came on later.
And they came up with their own resource guide for it. So
yes,
this is
one of the things. Yep.
One of the things that we didn't talk about, John, partnerships before, though, is that your partners can work for you in a variety of different ways. So the Carter Center did they came up with their own kind of guide and a resource guide for mental health awareness that was aligned with No Time to Fail and part of that screening experience. More recently on our short film, The Officials that Margo mentioned that just came out, issue 1 created a whole discussion guide for us. These are normally things that you would like hire for and develop on your own, but these partners are like they have the ability, they have the funding, it's already part of their mission. And so they come in and do, some of them are able to do this work for you. But yeah, I forgot to mention the kinema thing. And this is, I know we love lessons learned in this. And if everyone wants to talk about the things that I wish we had done better, with kinema, one of the things that I wish we had done was, make it more of a rare artifact. So one of the things that I'm excited about seeing other filmmakers do, which is basically doing these kind of limited availabilities on Kinema, where there's like, okay, the film's available now, and now it's not going to be available for a few months, and then you build your network, you build your mailing list, etc. We're going to make it available again, and then you don't limit ticket sales. Like at that time, the thinking was, if you want distribution, you don't want it to be widely available. You want to limit the scope of your film's travels in order to make it more attractive to distributors. And like, I kind of wish we just like ignored all of that and just went out and really grabbed the bull by the horns and we're much more aggressive about making the self-distribution journey one where we were driving it as opposed to responding to what distributors would want.
Right. So just walking through this, so you did a couple of festivals, and then were you always planning on doing a limited theatrical, or when did you start deciding to do a limited theatrical, and what was your reasoning to do the limited theatrical? And did you do, in the limited theatrical, did you like do a traditional week-long run in New York for press and then one night screenings in other cities, or can you just talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I have so many feelings about this. So, we always thought we would do a limited theatrical. Sorry, my son is moving. Um,
Yeah.
we always thought we would do a limited theatrical. I think the question was, like, do we want to do something that would qualify us or not? We kind of, we never wanted to put ourselves, we didn't think that we were going to be competitive for awards. And so when it comes to there's a lot of good reasons to do that if you think you're going to be competitive. It absolutely helps with visibility. It absolutely helps with reviews. It can really land your film within kind of like the psyche of the film world. I gotta tell you, with this film, we just didn't care what the film world thought about this film. We really cared about its greater impact elsewhere. And with limited funds, just doing a qualifying run was going to feed a machine that was never going to embrace this film. So we were like, let's just take those funds and take that those resources and apply them to the audience that we're really seeking to connect with. So we did eventized screenings with our partners. And so again, all these partner networks worked alongside us to do these eventized screenings where the local partner would drive audience. I think this is a familiar model for most people on this call. The local partners would help do all of that audience outreach in addition to what we could do. And then either we would come or we would get local election officials there. There would be some kind of education, conversational element connected to the screenings. But I appreciate the question about like doing the week long. And there's a couple of films that maybe it's just anyway, maybe it's just me. But I think in this kind of very cutthroat competitive environment, you want to be smart about your resources. And if your goal is like that level of visibility, I mean, the most watched documentary film of any year is the Academy Award winning documentary film. Full stop. That is the one that most audiences are going to talk about, most American audiences will see, etc. So it's a great goal to have. And if it's also really important for career advancement, all that kind of stuff. I think for Margo and I, we were very focused on mission over career and over that kind of, and we also be honest with yourselves about like the film that you have and what it can do. And
Yeah.
we also were really clear about what was in our hands and where it would travel.
It's also important to know what resources you have, because usually most Academy nominations, there's like a pretty large marketing budget specifically geared just towards the nomination process, and that's a huge allocation of resources. So, yeah. So what was then the motivation for doing the theatrical release if it wasn't about qualifying? Was it, I imagine it was for press, or was it, is that the main reason that you
It
did
was
It
the
for
was
qualifying?
100% for
publicity.
press.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
for publicity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then and you guys hired a publicist,
We
and
did. So we worked with oh my God, who did we work with, Margo? I know who it is,
On
except for right
publicity?
now.
On
Yeah.
on what?
On the limited
oh,
theatrical.
Oh, Michael Tuckman.
No,
okay.
Tuckman he did the theatrical, but he didn't do the PR for us.
Oh,
Who was
the publicity. That's what I was trying to find. Falco.
Falco?
Well,
Yeah. They were great. It's just the kind of and we got like I will say that we did get like we got the pull quotes that we wanted. We got like a lot of the stuff that we were looking for. We did get, and it also was helpful to model for our partners what these events could be like.
mhm.
So in addition to reaching the press goal for us, it helped kind of create the model in the minds of our partners for exactly how this.
Right. Cool.
The
Great.
I don't want to run out of time to pivot to PBS because throughout this whole time we were thinking
Yeah.
about larger broadcasts. Is this a good time to do that, John?
Oh, but I
Yeah,
do
yeah, yeah.
mention
So
Jamie
just
Shore though, because Jamie Shore did do a really wonderful event for us in DC and
right.
help with press on that too. Sorry.
So just very briefly talk about the windowing of like when the theatrical was, when you got
Yeah.
your PBS deal. Like, did you do the theatrical before PBS happened, or did you already know PBS was happening? Or so just walk us through that timeline of, you know, you know, you have a festival, a couple festivals, just that,
I'm giving you a visual. There was no windowing. This was an impact theatrical. So festivals, theatrical, all of these online events, all were happening at the same time. The only
uh,
windowing we did was the PBS broadcast itself
That's right.
with educational, and we wanted the educational to be. We could talk for that for a minute about that for a minute. We always really felt like it was important to be in the educational market with this film. We had offers from
mhm.
distributors who were taking educational rights, but really had no skin in the game and for educational, no track record, no real intention. Maybe they pretended they were going to do some work in that field market, but it was clear that they don't have those connections. And we walked away from that, used those offers to push PBS to take it for their educational platforms. We had to push. You have to advocate, but because we
Right.
wanted it to be available in classrooms and to students,
That's right.
because it's so clear to us that that those lies about that election were able to take off so quickly because our fellow Americans are just not educated about civics.
So
Um,
did you think about what about working with an educational distributor, like having PBS do the broadcast and then having an educational distributor
Well, here
handle
was the
the
challenge. So
educational?
there's lots of great educational distributors out there who both Sarah and I have worked with, and we love you. And we also wanted it streaming. So we were thinking about distribution that would get it on Prime and get it on Apple TV and get it in the educational market. And it just turned like having that we chose for this film and for us in that moment that having it like on Prime under PBS documentaries would be a smart move, right? And so
Right,
it kind of was like a catch-all.
right. Yeah,
It
yeah.
also, by the way, got us a rebroadcast this fall that garnered more than 3 times the number of views than the original broadcast, which
So
is fascinating, actually.
yeah. So how long after your kind of theatrical, event theatrical window involving all those components was the PBS broadcast?
It was October. It was a year later.
Oh, a whole year later. And were you
Well, I
like,
know.
were
I
they
mean, it's not really a year later. It was a year into our impact work. So, right,
That's
we
right,
launch in August, go through the midterms in 2022 fall, do a year of this impact work, and then October 2023 is the broadcast premiere, which our team, we had Red Owl on board and our social media team helped to promote and launch. So we had a full year of an impact team on this film. Not
right.
all films have the luxury of a budget like that, and it's not the way forward for all films. But if you do have some money to hire, it's a good
Yeah.
model.
So, and then, so how many, just in terms of how many total screenings? So you did 10 limited theatrical, and then how many other screenings did you do through community screenings over that time period?
Yeah.
Oh, over 100.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's
We did
great.
over 100 screenings, and I would also like to shout out. We're not gonna have time for it here. There are a lot of ways to do this in a way that does bring in income and can help self-fund distribution. This was a philanthropically funded campaign. We gave the film for free, and we also had grant money to help us get it out there. So that was just our approach because of the situation we were in. We haven't seen money come in. We didn't get money back from PBS. We still haven't even gotten 1 penny in royalties. Just so folks are like to be transparent about how this works. When you're really pushing for
Yeah,
PBS, you're not really making money doing that. So if you're going to need money to get it out there, you need to tell a grantor somewhere to help you. Um,
right.
so that was, there are ways to bring in some money, but
Yeah,
We
right. No,
that was part of our decision-making process all along the way. Like we were very clear from the very beginning that this film would need to be philanthropically financed, the distribution would need to be philanthropically financed, and that the goal was one that was more about mission over money. So we knew that from the very beginning. But that's when, I mean, this is a group of filmmakers, right? So we made sure to build our salaries in there. Like we made sure that we built in like lines for ourselves in the distribution and impact, so that it's not just we were getting a line for production, but we were getting a line in for the work that we were doing on the impact side too. So if you're going to be, as you're thinking about your financing plans, like for some films, you need to be thinking about like equity and return and all of this kind of stuff. And that would inspire a very different plan than the one that we made. We were able to be nimble, we were able to be responsive, we were able to not really have to think very how do I say this? Rigidly around the windowing, because we had the gift of the charitable gifts.
Right.
So that gave us, I mean, of course, it ties you to certain kinds of things, but it also frees you in other ways too. But if you're going to do it, just make sure that your budgets are real budgets.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the budget, the whole distribution and marketing budget for the film?
Sarah just dropped in 250. I think it was 221, but close.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was like, it's around there. I remember I should have looked at it right before this.
It's all right.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah. So now that you have the numbers for your broadcast, like, so how many people watched the first broadcast, and then how many watched the broadcast later?
Yeah, I think the first broadcast was like somewhere between 9 and 10,000. But then the follow-up was like 32,000.
Mhm.
Um, and so to see a film that's like, you would think when you're a repeat, you would think that fewer folks are tuning in, but it's really interesting in seeing how it's actually built and how the audience interest actually increased. And what the analysis we've not been able to do is like, what kind of marketing did America Reframed do? How was it profiled the first time versus the second? But the 2023 year was also an off election year. 2024 is an on election year, so there's going to be a different kind of motivation to watch.
Yeah. And
Also,
then do you have any?
oh.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna tell my favorite story about YouTube. So if you go through PBS, they are putting stuff on YouTube now. I'm a big if you as long as you're not looking, I haven't put my other film on YouTube because that film, it needs to raise its own money for distribution, and putting it on YouTube would cut off my ability to have income from it. So this is only for a film where you don't need to be generating the income. If what you're looking for is audience, YouTube is a fantastic place. And this film was on YouTube through the World Channel, on the World Channel's page. And no joke, you guys, I was in Detroit for a film shoot for our sister film, so to film election officials, and I get in this lift. My driver self-identifies in this conversation with me as a conservative guy from the suburbs of Detroit. And he starts asking what kind of films I make, and I told him, and he told me, I saw your film. And I was like, no, you didn't see my film. Like, I just don't think you saw my film. Like, this isn't true. And then he's like, no, I watch documentaries on YouTube. And he started telling me about our film. And then he proceeded to tell me that he likes watching left-leaning. I don't think it's left-leaning. I think it's just truth-telling from the middle, to be perfectly honest. But he called it left-leaning media because it keeps him from going off the deep end too extreme in the other direction that he's called to. And so YouTube, if you have the ability to offer, don't just throw it on YouTube because the algorithms won't put it in anyone's feed anywhere. It will just die. But if you have the ability to leverage YouTube through a distributor whose algorithms might drop it in someone's feed, it does help reach audience outside our bubbles.
Cool. I'm just responding to someone in the chat. I think we're pretty much anything else from the distribution that we haven't covered. I think we can kind of move into Q&A, and as I'm typing into this one question, I think let's keep the questions in the Q&A pretty much for this film and related issues around this film and the distribution, and other kind of questions about fiction and there's one about a fictional film about a superhero. That's more for an AMA or some other discussion perhaps. So are there any questions in the chat? I think that so the only thing is that Margo, you've been answering nearly all the questions in the chat already. I don't know whether, I guess the one thing about there's a question recently about impact funding. And if you guys can talk about like what, advice for impact funding.
We've been incredibly fortunate with the relationships we were able to develop over the course of production, in that the majority of our funders who funded production came in on impact. I think only one or two additional came in addition to the ones who participated in the production itself. These and those same funders also went on to fund our short film that just premiered on time.com.
Right.
So this is like that whole idea is like you build a relationship, you continue to develop it, and if you deliver, those relationships continue and come back to you. Um, we are so deeply grateful to these funders. But every single time, again, this was about communication, as Margo was saying. We would back to them with regular reports. They knew exactly where we were. They knew when we were having they knew our tough spots that we were in. They knew our greatest successes, but they were with us 100% of the way. And I would say that when it came to those sources of funding, we were very particular in trying to find those folks who were not just film funders, but who were democracy interested in issues of democracy. So very much subject matter aligned, more so than filmmaking, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's still a competitive space, but there's less story, like because there's fewer storytellers going out to the subject areas, you stand out in a different way.
Yeah. So, and then if you've written a question in the chat and feel it hasn't been answered, just rewrite it. I have a question from Mary. How long has your distribution been after your film was completed? Because yeah, we didn't really fully encapsulate that timeline. And you mentioned other films. How did you balance making new films with distributing this one? Which I think is a big question for all filmmakers and all filmmakers that I work with. It's like a constant. I'm really curious what your answers are.
So the answer to the distribution is we finished this film in August of 2022, immediately launched the distribution we've been talking about. Exactly, or a year later in October, it had its broadcast premiere. And so that it was about a year long of an active campaign, but then it kept, the community screenings piece doesn't end immediately. Like it kind of kept going at a lower level. We brought it back in house, so we started managing them as opposed to Red Out, the impact campaign manager managing them. And then we pivoted pretty much at the same time into making this new short called The Officials, and the link is in the chat. I think the answer about the other films, I mean, to be honest, I don't know a filmmaker who doesn't have multiple projects. It's impossible. These things take so many years. It's literally impossible to do this work if you don't overlap your projects. I don't know that anyone else can say otherwise, honestly. Sometimes one project needs a lot of attention and the other one you're kind of just managing on the side, and then the other project's on fire and you're managing the other one on the side. Managing on the side might be the communication piece, emailing folks, telling people what's up, taking the next step, reaching out to a potential funder while you're in the field on this one. It's a lot of multitasking, guys. I don't know what else to say.
And I would say anyone who says it's easy or makes it look easy, it's not easy. Not for any single person. So there's this is really hard. And for most people, like Margo said, you're having to juggle several different films at the same time. And I would say that if we didn't have other films, like The Officials that Margo dropped the link in the chat, that film we made as a way to extend our outreach for No Time to Fail. Essentially, we're like, okay, this No Time to Fail is going to show to PBS audiences. It's a feature-length verite film. There's only so many people who are going to watch that kind of format. We still really care about this issue. This issue is in constant motion. It's actually changing. The film we made 2 years ago is the conditions on the ground have changed. So we went out and we made a short again to prepare for just the election season that we're in. And so for us, the officials is in a weird way part of our impact work, connected to deep, if not part of, deeply connected to our impact work for No Time to Fail. So juggling production while trying to do distribution for another film, it's hard. It stinks. Um, uh, we probably could have done much more. We could have picked up where Red Owl left off and continued to do bookings, continued to really press outreach. My experience with distributors, I'm distributing another film right now called Richland. Um, we're working with Cinema Guild on our educational distribution and digital distribution. Um, we're bringing way more resources to that table, which is basically a form of self-distribution around the educational distribution than they're really coming with, right? So there's no matter who you're working with, you need filmmaker muscle involved to make any of this successful. It's always a juggling act in order for you to be even somewhat successful, but that juggling act is also sometimes keeping you away from how you can maximize outcomes. And so I think one of the things that every filmmaker has to decide is like, what's my priority today? Is my priority the new film and my career goals aligned with that new film? Or perhaps it's like maybe it's mission aligned. Maybe it's just like bringing money into your house, which we all need to do. Or is my goal like, am I really trying to get this film the widest audience or longest tail of distribution as possible? You make different choices depending on those different goals. And so I think your North Star is not just per film, but it's for you, right? What's your North Star for yourself and what you're trying to build for your own career?
I couldn't have said it better. It's like, it's exactly, I want to flip that out and add it to my goals post and everything I say about goals, because it's like, yes, it's like how you determine what you do is based on your goal. And it's like you can choose many things to do. So yeah, super well said. And so here's a question that could be, I don't see any other questions, and maybe this is the good last question is, and this is, you guys will maybe have already seen this question. Do you think there's room in the market to improve the lack of royalties for movies like these? And feels like you should have seen some revenue from streaming in a just world. Are there any upcoming distribution avenues or platforms you have your eyes on, theatrical or streaming?
There's a lot in this question. I'll address some of it, and then Sarah can address the rest of it. So I mean, to be fair, we have a deal with PBS that gives us a percentage, and someday, it's just a long road to see those numbers and find out how much that will be. So we will get some royalties. It's not going to be as much as we probably deserve for being the filmmakers, but we'll get some. But we did, I think we said earlier, the strategy for distribution for this film, because we had philanthropic, we had people donated money to support the outreach, was to offer the film for free. You can have a different strategy. Speaking of like, what's your North Star for today? The goal can be to raise money, and maybe you have a both and. The goal is to raise enough money to keep the distribution going, but not necessarily, it's not like a big profit goal. I'm not just trying to maximize profit, but I'm trying to bring in, you can have lots of different goals when you go in. So I just think it's important to make note that there wasn't a goal of profit for this film because we had money to run the campaign. And quite frankly, the officials was able to get made because some of those same funders said, yes, if you're interested in making a shorter film going to these other states about the same topic, please do that. And here we will also, help you out. It wasn't easy to close that budget, but we had funders on board and money in to do that, right? It wasn't out of pocket. I will say, we don't have time to talk about it, but I have a film called The Philadelphia 11, which I think you might have seen in the description for this webinar. You can go to our website and see our screenings. We're up to maybe 440 screenings and going strong. We get about 7 to 8 inquiries a week about hosting screenings and about 3 to 4, sometimes 5 book per week. And that's only expanding. I actually went to the University of Wyoming. I was there this week, invited to speak. They did a huge rollout for the film. This is more than a year into it. They did a whole lot around the film. It was a super engaging event. We're probably going to, we're not really supposed to talk about it publicly yet, but we're going to be on PBS next year through American Public Television. The point is, this film, from the beginning, we knew it needed to be funded, self-funded. The distribution needed to be self-funded. So the entire campaign has impact goals and audience reach goals, and was always designed to also bring in the money to self-fund, and it is doing that. We have a sliding scale. You can show the film for a very low amount if you're a low resource group, and you can pay a very hefty amount if you have the money, and that funds us. And we are bringing in healthy amounts of money to fund the campaign. So how you design it, thank you, Lane, for dropping the website in. How you design, the design of the campaign also has a lot to do with the money that comes in.
Right. So I'll take a shot at that answer as well. Unless, Sarah, do you want to?
Well, you go first, but I have some thoughts that are maybe bold thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, mine are, we're dealing with a world where there are certain predatory practices that have been practiced by certain elements of our industry, which I'd say they're the streamers. And both not only in terms in a variety of different ways, and I'll be writing a post about this. There are certain initiatives to help, certain entrepreneurial initiatives to kind of help this. There's a lot of platforms that are popping up. How they're able to compete with the streamers is a large question in terms of those kinds of practices, and especially in terms of audience retention practices. And although I think in times of crisis, there's room for, quote unquote, just disruption, just like they disrupted. Hopefully there's room for counter disruption. But there's also a group of filmmakers that are working to start advocating, which I'm a part of, to start advocating for the interests of independent film. But it's going to take a little while. We're going to be we haven't really, again, officially announced this, but we'll be, spending a year kind of doing research and coalition building. And, because there's currently no one advocating for independent film anywhere. It doesn't exist. It existed maybe 20 years ago with FIVF, maybe as 20, 30, 40 years ago. But there's no one advocating for us. So I'll pass it off to Sarah.
Well, I mean, I'm familiar with what John's talking about and the initiatives he's talking about, which I think are absolutely so desperately needed. We all need to be working together because we're all in such competition with one another that we're actually not being able to organize in a way that we can apply pressure for better terms and better conditions on the ground. Margo is a longtime labor organizer, so this is her wheelhouse. I do want to just say that, first of all, like as John said, we're just like working within a set of structures that are designed to take money away from us. All right. They're not designed to actually support us with long-term revenues, especially for those are those of us who are working on kind of like mid to small level budgets. The returns there need to be from activities. The fairest returns are things that Margot's doing for herself, and she's getting like a very robust distribution for Philadelphia 11 that she's doing on her own time with her own niche audience, and it's actually working. But in terms of what other kinds of what places am I watching? I mean, I am watching for disruption, and I am hoping that we are all going to be working together to create that disruption. I am looking for new kinds of verticals on YouTube. I am looking for ways for us to really think about ad-supported streaming and how to maximize like the returns we get from ads. I'm seeing it work on TikTok. Like, why is it not working for us in other spaces? I am looking at storytelling on TikTok and other spaces, which means maybe breaking out of the forms that I've become addicted to, right? I'm quite addicted to long form, and maybe that's just not the space for the monetization of these kinds of films anymore. So what I'm looking at is kind of like breaking out of my own ruts, organizing with other filmmakers, and then finding the places where we can either better apply pressure or create disruptions of our own to expand storytelling spaces in ways that benefit filmmakers.
Yeah. I'm actually reading a book right now, and we're gonna, it's called, I'm just trying to find, let me just find it on Bookshop because I try not to suggest people buy things on Amazon. And so
While
It's
you're
called Filter
looking for it, I
World.
will say one other, I'm going to say one other thing, which only piggybacks on what Sarah and John were just talking about, is in light of the election last week or whenever it was, there will probably need to be a doubling down on everything we're talking about, because there will also be I'm trying to, a coldening effect, right? Some self-censoring, I suspect, will happen. And so independent voices are going to become more important, and the doubling down on us getting them out there will become more important.
Yeah. So I just dropped the Filter World, and that,
Yes.
if you read that or listen to it, you are going to go, oh my God, that's why we're in the
Yep.
S blank blank T that we are. And you'll see how it's about how algorithms and the corporations that use algorithms basically flatten culture, which means that it's everything's gearing towards a certain kind of mainstream kind of content, flattened content, which is what you see the streamers now producing and guiding people to. And it's not only in our space, but also in music, even in coffee shops and tourism, et cetera. It's pretty pervasive, and it's pretty fascinating. Yes, agree, Ricky, monoculture.
And this is, I got it. This is where punk rock time comes back in, John.
Yes,
Punk rock time comes back in.
exactly. So, well, I'll be posting this to the Substack probably in a couple weeks. I like to do kind of some takeaways, which usually take me a little time. Maybe I can get, if you guys are open to sharing the pitch deck, I can also share the pitch deck with people, but I have people do a pretty extensive questionnaire, which fortunately so far the two participants in these case studies have been kind enough to and generous enough to fill out. So I'll also be posting the extensive questionnaire with more detail about the release when I post the Substack. So thank you all for coming. Sara, Margo, thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. Lovely, and also all your great work that you do, and being so generous with not only your time, but also generous with, you know, your experiences and the numbers, you know, and being very transparent. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining. We're going to be doing more of these. Upcoming is going to be we're actually having Carrie Putnam on December 5th talking about her new study from the Kennedy School, Sara, so she's going to be talking about her new study about the audience that exists for independent film, which is actually quite hopeful because she found that there's a large audience for independent film. It's just not being serviced now by the companies that theoretically are supposed to be servicing those audiences or have set themselves up to service those audiences. And I'll be announcing that in the Substack, like in the next week. There will be also an Eventbrite link to sign up for, etc. So great.
Highly recommend this, you guys. Highly recommend that conversation. Please do go.
Oh, also, I'm doing another case study with one of the films we released with Film North next week on November 20th. I don't know if I have the link prepared, unfortunately, but you can just go Google Film North and John Reese case study or something. If you just Google Film North and John Reese, you'll get the link. So, and that's next Thursday. So cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for the invite, John.
Yep.
Thank you, John. That was great.
Thanks, Julia.